Hi, everybody. Could you please raise your hand if you've waited for too long for customer support? Yeah. Okay, now raise your hand if you've waited so long that you ended up eventually just hanging up the phone. Yeah, okay, yeah, exactly. So that's why we started Ada Support. We're an AI-powered chatbot company for customer support. And what we're trying to do is give back all of that time that people waste waiting on the phone, waiting on hold to talk to customer support, get their issue resolved. We work with some really huge and awesome companies like TELUS, like AT&T, Coinbase, Wattpad, Top Hat, Medium, a bunch of really great companies that are here actually today. So if you're interested in hearing more about Ada, please come and find me. After this talk or throughout the day, I'd love to chat with you. And we use a ton of Python at Ada, so we're very happy to be here. Okay, so let me introduce today's speaker, or this morning's speaker. Froilán Irizarry is a developer, community builder, and recovering entrepreneur. He's worked with enterprise companies, governments, and startups using various technologies, focusing on the last couple of years specifically on Python and JavaScript. Over the last 4 years, he's helped organize a number of tech events, including Fullstack Nights and PyCaribbean 2017. In the past year, he's worked with the US Digital Service, completing his term, and co-founding the Maria Tech Brigade. He joined Code.gov, where he now helps US federal agencies share and open government source code. Awesome. Okay, so please put your hands together with a nice warm welcome for Froilán.
Thanks. All right, can everybody hear me? Great, so one moment. Awesome. So good morning, everybody. Thanks for the intro, and I would first like to thank the organizers of PyCon Canada for doing an awesome job. So I would really like everybody to give them a round. So this talk has gone through a lot of iterations over the past months. I started thinking about, well, maybe I should talk about developer responsibility during disasters. Maybe I should talk about how we build communities during disasters. And I ended up thinking, well, that was a bit arrogant on my part to say how things should be done. So I ended up deciding to give my opinions and lessons that I learned specifically for the Maria hurricane in Puerto Rico. So as mentioned, I'm Froy. To help frame my opinions and the lessons learned, I would like to tell everybody a story of how I became a software developer and how I got to where I am now. So in the beginning, there was these 3 movies that got me interested in computers. I did not grow up with a lot of tech, so once I saw these movies, I was completely enthralled in what the Gibson was and how the master control program could do anything it wanted within this like weird black marble box. So, I mean, hackers, war games, and Tron really pushed me into wanting to be in tech. And bottom line, it's light cycles, lasers, and cyberpunk. So what's not to love? Specifically, Hackers was the movie that really got me interested in, and I use this very loosely, hacker culture in quotes, because I saw these characters just doing things they loved because they could. And it was a concept that when I was growing up was a bit foreign to me when it came to tech. And this took me to college with my brain set on computer science because, you know, I was going to hack the Gibson somehow. After college, though, reality hit and debts pile up, so I started to work, as most of us do. And I started working as far away as the fantasy of hackers, Tron, and war games could get me. I started working in an insurance company, maintaining insurance software that was built 20 years prior to where I started developing. So a couple of things kicked me in the pants when I started doing this. First, I realized that I was not going to get any greenfield projects at all in this company. It was all about charging hours, pushing features, and making things not break, which they did constantly. Greenfield projects for me were like free time if I had it, or the mythical startups that were starting to pop up. We used Agile, or really a faster waterfall, to do our software, where we had a huge PowerPoint that we divided up in segments of 2 weeks, because that's how you do it, right? And that was the beginning of my career. Even though software development was still fun, my perspective started to change about what it meant to be, and I use this also in quotes, a real software developer. The usefulness of the software in this environment was really an afterthought. It was all about, hey, if you double click it on Windows and the window pops up, we're good, right? If you can click a button and numbers pop out, we're also good. So it wasn't the best environment to cultivate good software practices. And believe me, I started to cultivate very bad habits. So I'm going to talk about some war stories that I have, primarily because of my own stupidity, more than anything that happened in some machine somewhere. So I discovered global variables at a very early point in my career, and I had been trying to fix a bug that was data was disappearing while we were transforming one object into another object, so a quote into a full policy. And this software was so big and old, and I was so inexperienced that I really never found it. So I decided it would be a good idea just to put a global variable at the beginning of the start time of that app, and I would obviously close it at the end of the start of that app's life. I didn't talk to users to see if that was the way they used the software. There were no tests, period, except me firing up the compiler, going through the windows, shutting it down, and saying, "Eureka, it worked." So I pushed, and that went into production. How many of you have heard the wisdom that says that you should code like the next person that's going to maintain that code is a psychopath that knows where you live? Yeah, right? Okay, so that psychopath ended up being my wife. And we already lived together, so one day I pick her up, and she's like fuming, just really, really mad, because some douche did a global variable that had cost apparently more than $1 million in losses because data was being corrupted. And when she's explaining the problem and how she yelled at the user saying that you're gotta be lying to me, this is not reproducible, I remember the name of the variable. And I still remember it to this day. So as you can imagine, that conversation did not go too well. I did not sleep soundly that night. But it goes to show how that mentality of just get it done because we have hours to bill really transformed my brain from doing cool things on a computer and throwing a Cookie Monster virus into the Gibson into doing that. Yeah, so test data usually should not go into production. And I would love to say that I learned my lesson with the global variable, but apparently I did not. So I was still a consultant, different company, different industry, and they pull me into an office and say, hey, we need to throw out all these invoices to our customers. It has to be done by 1 a.m. today, because that is the only moment where we can take the data from the mainframe and push it into this other database so that they can print out things and put it into envelopes. This was obviously 5 o'clock on a Thursday, because that's how you do it. So my job, my responsibility at that moment as a consultant for this company was to flat out say, I am not going to touch your production systems with test data. It just shouldn't be done, right? To what the answer was, don't worry about it, we have backups. As if those never ever failed before. And bear in mind that these were mainframe backups, so it's not like we have it on a fancy hard drive, they were on tape. Okay. So instead of me saying like, no, there's no way I'm going to do this, as a consultant, I said, sure, I will do this, and I will get it ready for you in 2 hours, because we never fail at estimates either. So at 11:30 at night was when I really finished. So I have an hour and a half to this self-imposed deadline. And I said, well, I have the SQL ready, I have everything ready. I already tested it in test. I have the data that has to be pushed. Let me just push it. So at 11:30, I pushed the test data into production and overwrote all their invoices for the month. I will not lie, that was an incredible scary moment, but it was incredibly scary, in my opinion, looking back, for the wrong reasons. I didn't say, whoa, I failed at my responsibility as a consultant and as a developer. I thought, I'm going to get fired. This is it for me. I mean, this is like multi-million-dollar, disappearance of data. That's it. I'm never going to work in this town again. So what do I decide to do? At midnight, I decide to call the administrator, as you do, to get those backups. So the administrator of said system answers, very annoyed, and when I tell him what happens, I got very colorful adjectives thrown at me. And if you ever heard a Latino curse at midnight, it is very fast and very, very colorful. And everything turned out okay. I later knew at 3 in the morning, because this person let me stew in my chair while he repaired this. So at 3 in the morning, I called him up and said, like, hey, what's going on? Do I still have a job? And he says, oh yeah, we had a backup from like a couple of minutes prior to your mess up. That's been online for the past 2.5 hours. So moral of the story, be responsible and treat your admins with respect. Yeah, this is bad. Don't do it. Bad Froy. Not exactly my fault at that particular moment. I was not in charge of the system that did this, but I was also in a position to raise hell about it, and I didn't. Primarily because I thought it was a losing fight, and I had too much work on my plate. Yeah, this is really bad. Don't, please. So after that last one, I said, you know what? I'm tired of this consultant life. It's not really giving me satisfaction. I started, this was more or less the midpoint of my career. I quit my job. I got into freelancing. And I did freelancing waiting for time to do the idea that would change the world that would be my startup. I also started to interact with a lot of other software developers that had their perspective of software was very different from mine. And thankfully I met these people because these people actually made me love to develop software again. It stopped being a job. It was more of a adventure, if you will, of how to solve a problem, how to bring something into the world, how to just play, right? Which the past couple of years consulting had killed for me. They also projected a finesse about software development that I just didn't have. And I started to realize that the responsibility of testing this software was on me, the developer, right? I was the one that would probably understand this code better, so I should, at the very least, have some automated testing. I mean, these people coded like, and treated their code like if it was alive. And that was very, very different for me. I came to realize also that, maybe erroneously, and I do think that erroneously now, that building software was about moving fast and breaking things. Emphasis on the breaking things, not on the moving fast. So I started thinking that assumptions were the enemy, and figuring out the market was the goal of software, and the MVPs, and those were my weapons. So everything was always fine. I started to use the pure form of agile, or more agile, or whatever that meant in my brain at the moment. There weren't any bugs, they were all features, right? I mean, sorry for your data, but thanks to you, we solved this bug and pushed it as a feature. That was the mentality, because we didn't have time to really think about the user as a person. The user was just a user. As you can start maybe realizing, at this point in time, my arrogance really shot up. I mean, I've been doing this for years. I was a consultant. I am now an entrepreneur. You don't know what you want. I know what you want because I know my software, right? And I mean, we all see a lot of big entrepreneurs sometimes say this, saying that users don't know what they want until you show them. Looking back now, that may be true in rare occasions, but users are people too. And our responsibility is to help these people solve their problems, not the other way around. It wasn't the best attitude I had. Thankfully, because I was a freelancer and because I was in this whole startup ecosystem, I started meeting more people that would change my perspective. And I met people that were very passionate about the human part of software and that aspect of treating users as humans that are using a product, not as numbers that will raise my valuation. And that for me was incredibly important. Firstly, because they introduced me to this community. This was 2013. It was the first time I went to a PyCon in Santa Clara. It was the first time I really interacted with a software community as we are, right? As you are. Very welcoming. Everybody just joked around and we laughed at our mistakes. And we also had frank conversations about opinions, and we were most of all incredibly respectful, which was something that with a lot of developers that I met back home just wasn't the case. So By this point, I was also humbled by these people I met with the fact that I really didn't know what I was doing. And looking, I mean, in retrospect, I honestly did not know. I was just pushing out code without really taking into account the user experience. So I went into Civic Tech, and I went into community organizing. And this really changed my perspective on how software should be built and the responsibility that I personally felt towards people that were going to consume my services. So for those that don't know, Code for America is a nonprofit in the United States that sends fellows to cities and state governments to help them tackle technology issues that they might face. They're incredibly small groups. There are a total of 3. They're usually a product manager, designer, and engineer. In the case of Puerto Rico, they went for the state government, and they brought an anthropologist with them. That was the first time I've ever met an anthropologist. I knew they exist, but to me, they were like some fairies that were looking down upon humanity and saying, like, this is silly. But this person was part of a software development team, which was incredibly interesting for me. And I started realizing before the term user research came along that that's what they were doing. They were talking to people, and they were extracting the pain points, and not just the pain points of, I don't know, this website is not readable, more to the, this website is not readable because, right? And it might be as simple as changing the contrast or changing the color scheme, but more to the point is it intelligible? Is it, in our case, in plain Spanish? Can somebody with a 4th-grade reading education, can they understand this? Can they read this? Because these are government services. These are not for people that just go to college. These are people that might not even know how to read well. And that was a switch that, for me, flipped. Because I never encountered this kind of interaction with users. I mean, I would sit down and get requirements, but I would not get their pain points. I would not get what exactly was bothering them about software. And at this point, part of what Code for America does is they also create a local brigade to help their efforts continue. So I joined Code for Puerto Rico, which is the nice image on the left. And in Code for Puerto Rico, we decided to embrace this wholeheartedly. And the MVP, that for me was just a way to see if there was a market for it, now became a way to bridge the gap between the people that developed in the brigade with the people that were outside in the plaza in front of where we met. We took to that plaza and we sat down with them. We bought them coffee. We started just frank conversations. We tried to be as human and not intimidating as possible. We never mentioned anything about computers. We only wanted to get what their pain points were in the communities they lived and how they thought it could be solved. Part of what brought us to that as well was a great TED Talk by Ernesto Ciroli. He is an Italian gentleman that has worked a number of years with NGOs, and his TED Talk is called "Want to Help Someone? Shut Up and Listen." It's an incredible talk, incredibly funny, that when we in the brigade saw it, we said, wow, we want to do that too. Because at the end of the day, if we're in civic tech, it's not just about what we want to build, it's who wants to use it and how they want to use it. And that brings in a whole other set of questions of what exactly does it mean to build a usable software? Like for me, usable software is something I can run in my terminal and spits out some pretty JSON, and that's awesome. I can read it, I can consume it. If I want to make another script, I can just pipe it into it, all good. But that doesn't mean it's a usable software for the people we talk to in that plaza. And our responsibility, and I think when I say our, I'm talking about the developer community, is to create these systems that are usable and, quite frankly, just human. That people can look at it and just say, oh, I get it. So I decided to go into government next, because I already got this bug of civic tech, and I was helping government anyway, doing these client-facing services that would help communities. So I decided to go into the USDS in 2016. And thankfully, the USDS was more of an extension and polishing of the ideas I got in Code for Puerto Rico, just in a scale that I had never worked before. The USDS is the United States Digital Service. It is similar to the Canada Digital Service. In fact, we consider each other like sister orgs, along with the GDS in the UK. We're all part of this digital service in government and trying to improve services in government for people, not just for government. And in the USDS, something that really attracted me was 3 out of their 6 values. Find the truth, tell the truth. Optimize for results, not optics. And design with users, not for users. Which, if I haven't bored you up to now, has been most of the things that I've been talking about that my career has been pushing me towards. And a lot of the kick in the, say, pants that I also received when talking to people and telling me I just don't get it. So the tech here was very important, right? I mean, it's a digital service. But it wasn't the only thing. A lot of the time we spent creating user personas, user journeys. We dedicated a lot of time into culture change and trying to get federal agencies to be more Silicon Valley-like. And I don't like to use that term too much because some people don't think highly of Silicon Valley, but we just wanted them to look at their tech as not a necessity for business, but as a part of their whole. And after completing that term, I carried that on into Code.gov, and now I am just working to extend what we did in the USDS to open source code. And this was a very happy point in my career. I felt I was doing something incredibly important. I felt that I was going to make a change, and then this happened. So this is Hurricane Maria over Puerto Rico. This was 24 to 36 hours of hell. You can't escape this. You're surrounded by water because it's an island, and this monster is 5 times your size. 95% of the island was without power. Less than half of the population had tap water. 95% of all cell communications were down. No power, no water, no communications, no fuel, no gas, and no food. 2,975 people died during this hurricane. That is the official death toll. Some people say it's higher, some studies say it's around the 4,000s. Let's keep to the official thing. To put it into perspective, in a natural disaster, specifically a hurricane, we have to go back to the 1800s to have a higher death toll anywhere in North America. So, setting the mood, I was in Washington, D.C. when this was happening. There was little to no information leaving the island. There were some reports from US-based news agencies. Some people in the government had some sort of like satellite phone, which just didn't work. From our perspective, in the US mainland, there are around 5 million Puerto Ricans living outside of the island. For us, what we saw, it's game over. The island was destroyed. We started getting a lot of misinformation about people killing each other, rumors of just the dead and massive looting. I mean, it was a mess. This was a moment where neighbors, and when I mean neighbors, I'm talking about separated by a couple of streets, didn't know what was happening with their other neighbors. So, a lot of people, not just Puerto Ricans, a lot of people in the US flocked to do relief work. And they flocked to do traditional relief work, which is making phone calls, working with logistics, getting supplies to actually arrive on the island. Really important work. And then there was a couple of Puerto Ricans which worked in a number of Silicon Valley companies and in government that we were incredibly desperate to do something. But we did not want to do traditional relief work because better people than us were already doing this traditional relief work. So we decided to do something we called the Maria Tech Brigade. And the concept was we were going to be ready to give tech relief. Because having working in the government of Puerto Rico, I knew how much they needed tech relief on a good day. So after this, we said like, well, let's just get a couple of friends, no more than 10, and we'll be ready to like whatever they need. And we knew it was going to go insane. We were going insane. We didn't know how our families were. It took 3 months before I knew how my father was. So we decided to do this. And in a week, we got 300 volunteers. Crap, things just got real, because now I have people asking me, what are we going to do? What's going to be our responsibility? And I want to make that word, I've said it a number of times because it's what I really believe. When we do work and when we push out services that people rely on, we are responsible. We might not be responsible for the outcome of something that happens, but we sure as hell are responsible for that service. And we are responsible, if we are disseminating data, to actually disseminate correct data and not misinformation. So I have 300 people, and desperate people do desperate things. So what do desperate developers do? Well, we do desperate software. And once I started seeing these people developing and pushing all this software out in a very desperate manner, it again colored my views on how to create software. So, how many people have heard about the concept of KISS? Keep it simple, stupid, or silly, or right? Okay, so I want to introduce another one. I am calling it kilt, as in the fancy apparel that Scottish people wear. Keep it low tech. This might not be a stopgap for absolutely everything, but it sure as hell helps when it's a disaster. You have a number of things working against you during a disaster of this magnitude. Data connectivity is spotty at best. Having people trying to consume data when data is that unreliable consumes their phone batteries that much more and that much more quickly. And that is also a problem because there's no power. We found out that the small amount of connectivity that people had on the island was voice. For whatever reason, some of the cell antennas were still working, but only the voice. And if you have voice, you can have SMS. And that, quite frankly, in my opinion, is as low-tech as you can get when it comes to transmitting some sort of data. But it could be a lifeline to people that are incredibly desperate. It could also be a huge relief to people that don't know how their family members were. And remember, desperate people make desperate decisions. And I had many conversations with people that were saying, I'm going to Puerto Rico to get my family out. And I would tell them, don't be stupid. You're just going to consume resources they don't have. And you're not sure if you can actually get out because the airports are now in the control of either some sort of government agency, in the case of the US, FEMA, or the military, because that's where the supplies are getting to. So there is no room for you to say, I am important, and get your family out. It is better that you stay on the other side. So SMS could be a simple way for those lucky enough to have that sort of connectivity to at the very least say, hey, I'm alive. Another thing, we are very accustomed, and I'm just going to speak for the US, which is what I know, and for Puerto Rico, we are very accustomed to have high bandwidth all the time. How many people here have LTE on their phones? Most of us, right? What happens when you go down to 3G? Personally, I throw the phone on the bed and go play video games because it's like, no, I'm not dealing with this. It's too much. My Twitter feed must be instant. And that is something that we have grown very accustomed to. And that is something that we don't take into account when we develop software. And when you try to push a couple of megabytes of the latest JavaScript framework onto a browser because it does fancy stuff, it might be fine for the regular day, but please don't ask somebody in a disaster zone to wait for your fancy JavaScript to load. Keep it as text. At the very least, text can be read to somebody that can't see. At the very least, text can be zoomed into somebody that has trouble reading. It is what a lot of our tech is built on anyway, because JSON is just text. Another thing is, the more complex a system is, the more Murphy has to muck around with. And when we push services for disaster relief, lives depend on it. When people discover a service that could tell them where to get water, where to buy food, or where the hospital with some fuel is, and that system goes down, it's better not having it. It's better not have to discover this service at all, because desperate people do desperate things. And when they find some sort of relief, they depend on that relief. Being responsible is of utmost importance here. And I'll give a couple of stories of how we managed to do Kilt. So we devised a way to get names and addresses of people that were alive on the island out of the island. We called it snail check. Since people couldn't go on their fancy phones into Facebook to say, hey, I'm okay, or into Google People Finder to write their names so that their family members can find them, we decided to, with whoever we could talk to on the island, tell them, don't go into the disaster zone. It's very dangerous. But if you do, take a pen, pencil, paper, whatever, and every person you meet, write their name, write their address, and send it to us, however you can. We received WhatsApp messages, text messages, pictures. Some people were working in places that had connectivity, emails. We got all this data, and we had about 50 people sitting down, taking this data, and writing it into Google People Finder. That is as low tech as you can possibly get. That is not software development, but it is developers thinking of solutions using tech to help users, to help humans. This way, we got 11,000 people into Google People Finder. Google also helped and gave us a rare API key for that service, which we then could actually do some sort of script that would upload CSVs into it. We got, it's very humbling and very fulfilling to receive an email, a call, or a message on social media saying, thanks to you, I know my dad's alive. That has forever changed my life and the way I view software. I don't care if it's Python, I don't care if it's JavaScript, I don't care if it's Ruby, I don't care if it's fancy or not. I care that it's impactful, that it's usable, and most of all, that anybody can use it. And I really believe that with this, we can accomplish that. A lot of other companies also helped. Twilio gave us a whole bunch of credits. And another person did a simple web form, just 2 text boxes and a button, where people could write a phone number and do a one-way SMS to tell people, hey, I'm alive and I'm okay. So this is another issue that we got. So we kept it as low tech as possible. We got people to use our things. Now we have the data issue. And data is, as most of us have come to realize, data is the new oil, right? It's highly important. It's why a lot of services are free, because we give them their data and they monetize it. In a disaster, data is not only important, it is crucial, and it is life-threatening at times. Why do I say life-threatening? During our work, we received a lot of disinformation about what was open and what was happening. I'll give you 2 examples. One member of the Maria Tech Brigade found a list of conveniently placed shopping centers and supermarkets that had power and were accepting credit cards. 3 days after the hurricane, when the government of Puerto Rico couldn't get a call out, magically, these supermarkets had full stocked food, power, and financial services. So this person immediately wanted to release this data because, hey, it's important. People can buy things. And that was a very unpleasant discussion that, in this case, I had to have, telling him, no, you're not going to throw this out because there's no way to corroborate this. We don't know where this came from. And when I asked, where did you get it? He said, Facebook. Like, all right, so that is not the most trustworthy place at the moment to get data from. And being in a desperate situation, this person did not understand at the moment, and he got very upset with us. But we knew for a fact that relief workers were spending 6 hours to go from one town to the next because there's no roads. So are you really going to push this data out for some poor person in the middle of the mountains in Puerto Rico to actually see, hey, 2 towns over, there's a supermarket that I can get food for my family? And he goes there and it was a lie? Or even worse yet, it was people waiting for these people to actually rob them, which in these situations, let's be real, happens. Not everybody is a good person. And again, desperate people do desperate things. So another one was actually reported by NPR. NPR is National Public Radio in the US. And they were doing a piece on the relief work that FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency in the US, was doing. And one of the things that happened was that they were in a hospital in a town called Arecibo, and 2 towns over in Aguadilla, another town, they heard that it was The Walking Dead. This person came into the hospital saying, I'm from this town, and things there are so bad that people are dying by the dozens. There's flies everywhere. The corpses are on the street. The hospital is like non-functioning. People are killing each other. I mean, the end of the world. So I'm listening to this podcast, and they switch the audio to the soldiers that were with the FEMA employees, because FEMA does have a security arm. And it sounded like very Tom Clancy, because you hear the ruffle of the gear, and you hear the soldiers go, 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 and they kick the door open. And when they kick the door open, people are laughing. There was no emergency. There was no Walking Dead. There was no people killing each other. There was nothing. When they went in, a scared nurse screams because here's this dude with an M16 pointing at her, because they were expecting the worst. And this kind of misinformation could have caused a horrible tragedy if that soldier was nervous enough, or if something jumped at him, caused them to lose resources because fuel is in short supply, and just threw them off their day-to-day. These are people that had a schedule of relief. So I went from the person that saw hackers and hacked the planet, and we have no names, man, and we have to throw everything out and liberate all data, to having to change my perspective in a disaster and say, not all data. Because, again, it was, I felt, my responsibility to keep people safe and to not augment the amount of disinformation that was coming out. Not maliciously, but from desperate people. Here's another big one for me. We should really stop duplicating efforts when it comes to certain softwares. During a disaster, this is incredibly detrimental. Companies are extremely generous, and if you ask, they will provide. Amazon, Google, Twilio, Facebook, all of them helped us and other organizations, not just with money, but also with supplies and free services. But those free services are finite. This isn't a hackathon that AWS throws out credits to get you hooked into their ecosystem. They are giving you a couple of $1,000s for you to help people. And that is finite. And while they are incredibly generous, they are also a business. So this free things will dry up at some point. The duplication of effort, I don't want it to be confused with what we're accustomed to do in, say, the open source world, where, oh, I see this framework is nice. It does not scratch my itch. I think I could do it better. I will do a new one based on that. That, for me, is amazing, and it's why we have such a vibrant community and why, honestly, modern software works. But that perspective has to be left outside when you're dealing with a disaster. A couple of reasons why. First of all, you want a single source of truth for people that are consuming services. You do not want to add to the uncertainty of somebody. Is it theaspericans.com or is it Facebook / whatever where I should get where to donate my money? Is it this endpoint on some sort of API that's giving me geodata, or is it better to go to the Red Cross? Go to the Red Cross. There's also no time to promote your new shiny thing. You're not going to take time away from helping people in a disaster to say how cool your thing is. So, I would prefer that our perspective in this scenario changes more to collaboration and not caring if it doesn't scratch our itch at the moment. Because at the moment, it's not our itch that needs to be scratched. It's the person that's in the disaster. It's the relief worker that needs that to be scratched. And I'll give an example on how we did this and how, as a team in the brigade, decided to work with these things. A small team within the brigade were very into mapping. So they did a huge efforts to make a sort of like a dashboard with different geodata and shapes to show where the latest reports from relief workers were popping up and where certain hospitals were open for, like, from official channels that we would receive. And we obviously pushed it out on the net so that anybody could look at it and collaborate with it. And then the Red Cross came to us and said, hey, your shapes are actually better than ours in certain areas. Can we use these shapes? Can you send me this data? And of course we did. And they also asked us, could you redirect your URL to our site? Because they were also hosting this data. And to the credit of this team, they said, yes, of course, and redirected it immediately because we wanted a single source of truth. We didn't want to confuse people. That was our responsibility as doing this tech relief. Bottom line, we have to leave our egos at the door. And me, as a software developer, I have a huge ego when it comes to my code. I sometimes don't like certain comments in code reviews. It's an exercise of lowering my head and say, yes, you're absolutely right, I was stupid. That has no place when we're doing this type of work. If an app is called for to be built and you think about doing that app, now is not the time to shine. Collaborate with these people. It's our responsibility to collaborate. We talk about collaboration constantly. So it should be front and center during this time. So why should we care? A number of reasons. They're human, and I think that should be reason enough, helping other humans. But I think that most of these can help us during building our businesses as well. The issue with unlimited bandwidth is not something that's specific to disasters. There's other parts in the world where 3G is the highest point that you can get, and it's not widespread. So if we build our systems to work well in these sorts of situations, they will, in my opinion, be flawless when it comes to optimal conditions. And that flawlessness is obviously up to you and how you as a developer define it. But I really do think that changing our perspective just a little bit and being more responsible with what we throw out can just make us better software developers, a better community, make better services, and at the end, make us better humans. So, thank you. Oh, and if